"Get out of my house, you useless dead weight, Camille, the most vicious daughter-in-law I've ever known," screamed those words straight into my face, right in front of my husband, right in front of my son. The entire dinner table froze. No one stood up, not a single soul. But just a few moments later, karma knocked on the door. The front door camera, yes, the one Camille thought she had taken care of, sent a video straight to my email. A recording. A piece of evidence exposing every crime she'd been hiding for the past 3 years. Then came the twist that blew everything open. The man who saved me in the storm, Elijah Brooks, was no stranger. He brought with him an SOS signal that only one person I never expected could have sent. If you were Camille, abusive, venom-tongued, drunk on power, would you dare to face the truth? Or would you run? Would you keep crushing your mother-in-law or kneel when your secrets finally surface? Hit subscribe now because Camille's downfall will give you chills. Comment, "I stand with Serafina," if you feel the same rage I do. I am Serafina Grant, 62 years old, a dark-skinned African-American woman born and raised in Atlanta. My whole life has revolved around things that never appear on anyone's achievement record, yet are the very things that kept this family standing. I cooked, cared for my husband, raised my son, cleaned, soothed every argument in the house as if I was born to be the quiet shadow behind everyone else. I was used to doing much, receiving little, and staying silent about what hurt me. But that Thanksgiving night, Camille's voice, my daughter-in-law, sliced through the silence I had lived in for 30 years. The house was filled with the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon, the familiar scent I spent 2 days preparing every year. Malcolm, my son, sat beside Camille, their hands clasped, as if the entire household was already under their control. I poured gravy onto the last plate and set it in front of Camille, but she pushed it away, her eyes cold like scratched steel. "You're not a mother," Camille's voice rang out sharp enough to cut the air clean. "You're just a burden living off us. This house would function better if you disappeared." The words landed on the dinner table like an axe. Malcolm flinched slightly but simply tightened his grip on her hand and lowered his head. He didn't look at me, he didn't speak, he didn't defend me, not even with a fragile breath. I stood frozen, the hot plate slipping from my hands and crashing onto the wooden floor. The sound echoed through the room and straight into my chest. My eyes burned, but I didn't dare blink. I was afraid that if I closed my eyes, tears would spill in front of the person who had just humiliated me with a sentence even the devil would recoil from. In that moment, I realized a truth I had avoided my whole life. I had spent my life supporting people who believed I was disposable. I had raised a son too afraid to stand up for his own mother. I had endured so much that they assumed I was born to be treated like this. I felt worthless in the exact way Camille had described. The feeling stabbed me over and over, cold and shaking, yet strangely awakening. I knew Camille had a cruel tongue, but I never imagined she would go this far, right in my house, on a day I poured my entire heart into. I bent down to pick up the broken plate, but my hands trembled too violently to touch it. Malcolm's silence tightened the pain in my chest until it felt like my ribs might crack. I tried to breathe, but the air caught in my throat. Just as I turned to leave the table, a sound barely above a whisper froze me in place. I heard Camille's voice, not directed at me, but toward my husband Daniel standing near the kitchen corner. "Give her a little more time to get older. Once she's weak enough, everything she owns will be ours." The room collapsed around me, not because of her words, but because my husband did not object, Not a word, not a sound, just silence, thick and frightening like an unspoken agreement. My chest clenched. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. I didn't know how I didn't fall right then. My entire world, everything I had spent a lifetime maintaining, disintegrated from one sentence, thin as thread but poisonous as venom. I stepped back a few paces, my legs numb. I looked at Malcolm, at Daniel, at Camille with her half-smile of someone who believed she had already won. And for the first time in my life, I understood I had never truly belonged here. I didn't know where I would go, but I knew one thing. That Thanksgiving night would be the last time I allowed anyone to trample on me again. I hadn't even reached the doorway when Camille added a sentence that chilled my blood. But to be safe, we need her to sign the transfer papers. She's stupid anyway. A few threats and she'll fold. I froze. My breath broke. And in the dim hallway, for the first time, I whispered a vow only I could hear. I would leave this place, and I would never return in the way they expected. I do not remember how I walked up to my room after hearing Camille's words. Everything in my head felt like a long black stretch, with only the sound of her insults circling like trapped wind inside the house that once used to be my pride. My hands trembled nonstop, each fingertip numb, as if it no longer belonged to my body. I opened the closet, looked at the familiar belongings of my 35 years, but everything felt distant and suffocating. The shirts I hand-washed for Malcolm when he was young, the scarf Daniel gave me our first year of marriage, all the things tied to memories that now felt like proof of my blindness. I took only a few clothes, a few essential papers, and put them into an old bag. Something in my chest dropped with the sound of the zipper closing, echoing an ending I no longer had the strength to resist. When I stepped onto the stairs, the house below still glowed with warm yellow light. I saw Malcolm standing near the window, the light outlining his face in a way that made me hope he would apologize, or at least say something from his heart. But when I walked closer to the door, his voice shattered any remaining hope. "Mom, maybe you shouldn't make this a big deal. Camille only said it because she was emotional." Just one sentence, light as air, yet every word pierced me like a needle. I stood before my son and felt as though I was standing before a stranger. He looked worried, but not for me. He was worried for Camille's comfort, for a peaceful dinner, for the mask of a perfect family he was terrified of seeing ripped apart. I had raised him to be kind, to value others, but now I was the only one he did not value. I opened the door, the cold wind rushing in and burning my eyes. I turned back for one last look at the house that had held me in duty for so many years. Daniel stood by the kitchen, silent face stiff as wood. Camille leaned against the chair, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction, as if she had been waiting for this moment all along. No one stopped me. No one called my name. No one said I mattered. I stepped out the door, closing behind me, with a sound that felt like a final verdict. The night sky was cold and thin, a black sheet stretched endlessly. I walked along the old path, my legs weakening, but something inside me burning in another way. I did not know where I would go, but I knew I could never return. My footsteps blended with the wind passing through the trees. Every breath was heavy and painful, but I kept walking. The path toward the Grant family's gate stretched longer than usual, or maybe my heart was being pulled backward by years of giving without receiving. When I reached the gate, I felt as if I had walked through an entire lifetime. My pain expanded with each step, as though every movement forced me to face the truth. I was not just leaving a house, I was leaving everything I once believed was family. I turned back for a moment of weakness, hoping someone would run after me, call my name. But all I saw was the dim light through the living room window. The curtain shifted, and I saw Camille's face clearly. She stood there, eyes locked on me. A slight smile curved on her lips, a small curl, but sharper than any word she had ever said. Not a joyful smile, not a sympathetic smile. It was the smile of someone who had just won a cruel match, knowing she had pushed her opponent off the board. I froze for a few seconds. My chest tightened, not from pain, but from realizing that my marriage, my family, my entire life had been manipulated quietly by someone like Camille. I tightened my grip on the bag, feeling the pieces of myself shifting in ways that were both painful and strangely clear. That smile did not only say she had won, it said everything was only beginning. Camille lifted her phone, still holding that poisonous smile, and spoke into it. I could not hear what she said, but I knew with certainty it had something to do with me. I stood under the dim streetlight, sensing a storm even bigger than this night waiting ahead, and Camille had just opened it. Snow whipped across the trees like an endless warning. I walked along the narrow path leading away from the Grant house, clutching the strap of my bag while something heavy pulled inside my chest. The night sky dimmed, and snow began falling in thin layers, light at first, but thickening quickly. I just wanted to get far away, away from every gaze that had treated me like an inconvenience. But the snow kept thickening, the wind slashing across my skin with a sharp sting, as if the night itself wanted to tear me open. The path blurred ahead of me, every step sinking into a cold, bottomless heaviness. The wind shifted and hit my chest so hard that breathing became a struggle. I wrapped my arms around myself, fighting to hold on to the last warmth I had. The night wasn't simply cold, it felt like it wanted to swallow me. My fingers turned purple, numb, losing all sensation. My legs trembled under me. I pulled my coat tight, but the wind twisted around me, tugging it loose, as if mocking my attempts. I searched for any sign of a house or an open store, but everything was buried in white. I was trapped in a world of snow that pulled me farther from the life I had just left behind. I took several more steps before my knees buckled and I fell onto the roadside ice, seeping into my collar and making my whole body shudder. I tried pushing myself up, but my arms had no strength left. My breath came in short, painful gasps, each inhale stabbing my chest like shards of glass. Through the screaming wind, I could hear my own heartbeat faltering, quick, weak, and frightened. I looked down at the snow beneath me, then toward the Grant home behind me, where the pain I had just escaped still clung to every shadow. I had walked away with the last piece of dignity I had, yet here I was lying in this brutal winter like a discarded soul. I gave my whole life to others. The words echoed inside my mind, torn and shaking. And my ending is on a frozen road alone? The thought hit me so hard I felt my throat burn. I wanted to cry, but the tears froze before they even formed. I'd always believed that kindness would return to you someday. But as I lay there, half buried in snow, the truth felt crueler than anything Camille had said. Life didn't always have a place for people who spent themselves for others. I forced myself to try again, placing my palms on the icy ground, but my hands slipped. My body refused to obey. Warmth drained from me, starting at my toes, crawling up my legs into my chest, and finally into my throat. My eyelids grew too heavy to keep open. Sounds around me blurred, fading into a distant hum. The last coherent thought I had was a memory of my mother braiding my hair on winter mornings. a soft memory, far gentler than the place I now lay. My body surrendered. I lay curled on the empty road, snow gathering on my coat, my hair as though nature itself wanted to bury me. I had no strength left. My breathing slowed, turning into thin, shaky sounds even I could barely hear. I felt myself slipping out of the world like a leaf torn from a branch. Then, through the numbing fog of my senses, I heard something cutting through the storm. A low engine rumble, a sound separate from the wind, distinct enough to pull me back from the void for a moment. Light flickered across the snow ahead of me. Headlights. A truck came into view, its dark frame moving closer until it stopped several steps away. The door opened with a metallic creak. Boots struck the icy ground. A man walked toward me, his shadow stretching long across the snow and over my unmoving body. He knelt beside me, reached out his hand, and said something I couldn't make out before the world went completely dark. I jolted awake with the sensation of being lifted off the freezing ground. Snow was still falling, but the warmth from the arms holding me made me slowly feel life return. The faint smell of pine mixed with the heavy scent of a winter coat, the kind worn by people used to the harsh north. I heard steady, strong breaths, the firm steps of someone walking across packed snow. A shadowed face came into view under the beam of the car's headlights. Deep, dark eyes, sharp and alert as if seeing through the cold gripping me. Elijah Brooks, a broad-shouldered, weathered man, leaned down and held my hand firmly. He introduced himself as the owner of a shelter a few miles away, a place for people lost in storms. He carried me to the car, set me inside, and shut the door, cutting me off from the storm that seemed eager to erase every trace of my existence. My body slowly warmed, but my mind drifted somewhere between exhaustion and confusion. Elijah drove us to the shelter, a small building lit by a single yellow bulb hanging under the eaves. He opened the door, helped me inside, and placed me on a thick bed with extra blankets. My body shivered from cold and from the realization that I had narrowly escaped death. Elijah sat in a nearby chair, his gaze steady as he watched my breathing while heating a cup of tea. When he placed it into my hands, the rising steam made my eyes sting. I looked at this stranger and sensed a calmness that was difficult to describe. Not pity, but an understanding of wounds he didn't need to ask about. "I don't want to let you leave here while you're still shaking like this," Elijah said, his voice rough but warm. I didn't respond. The heat from the cup softened my frantic heartbeat. His expression eased. Then he asked a question that changed the entire direction of my night. "Do you want to die out here, or do you want to live a life worthy of your own value?" The words hit me with startling clarity, cutting through every wall I had built over the years. My chest tightened, my throat closed. I had tried to be strong when I walked away from the Grant house, but tonight I nearly died in the storm. I thought my tears had been exhausted, yet they still spilled down my cold cheeks. Elijah didn't look away. He let me cry, let my sobs blend into the crackling fire behind us. After a long moment, when my breathing settled, Elijah watched me with a serious expression. I noticed something strange. He set my phone on the table. "Someone activated the emergency locator on your phone, but the signal was shut off just a few seconds later." My breath caught, my fingers tightened on the blanket. My phone had been in my bag when I left that house. I didn't remember touching it in my panic. Elijah tilted his head slightly, waiting for my reaction. His eyes weren't probing. They were patient, as if he wanted me to come to my own conclusion. Someone wanted me to be found, yet shut off the signal before it became traceable. Someone who wanted to save me, but was afraid to be discovered. I closed my eyes, searching through my memory for who could have done it. Not Camille. She wanted me erased from their lives. Not Daniel. His silence when I walked out had said enough. Then Malcolm. My son stood near the window when I left. He looked worried, although he didn't defend me against Camille. Maybe he had followed me to the hallway holding my phone, and in a brief moment of guilt, he activated the locator. But Camille or someone else must have forced him to turn it off. That thought made my pulse race. If it was Malcolm, why didn't he call out to me? And if it wasn't him, then who inside that house wanted me alive? I opened my eyes, my breath still unsteady. Elijah watched every change in my expression. I knew he was waiting for an answer, but even I didn't know what to say. That moment made me realize that tonight wasn't just the night I nearly died in a snowstorm. It was the night I discovered I mattered enough for someone in the shadows to want me to live. Not brave enough to stand against Camille, not strong enough to stand beside me openly, but strong enough to send a silent signal. I stared at my phone, unease and hope tangled inside me. Elijah, I whispered, if someone wants me to live, but won't reveal themselves, what does that mean, Elijah? Elijah didn't answer. He simply looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw the outline of a truth I wasn't ready to face. I woke up in the small room of the shelter as faint light slipped through the curtains. The night before had left lingering aches across my body, yet my mind was strangely clear. I knew that my life had taken a turn from the moment I collapsed in the snow, and Elijah Brooks lifted me up as if rescuing a soul from the edge of a cliff. When my feet touched the warm wooden floor, I sensed deeply that I could never return to the house that had rejected me, and I could no longer live my old life burdened with new wounds. Elijah knocked softly on the door, telling me breakfast was ready. I followed him into the kitchen, the warmth from the stove spreading through the room, making everything feel softer and less harsh. He set a plate of eggs and warm bread in front of me, then placed a printed sheet on the table that made my heart pause. It was a listing for a piece of land in Alaska, nearly 9,000 miles from my home. A small wooden cabin nestled on a hillside facing a frozen lake. Elijah placed the sheet down as though he had thought long about giving it to me. "You said you didn't want to go back," he said, "so you'll need a place far enough that nothing from the past can pull you in again." I stared at the faded image, seeing the lake like a sheet of cold glass, beautiful in a way that stole my breath. A remote place, far from everything that had ever hurt me. A place where I could begin again without anyone calling me a burden. I held the sheet, feeling my hand lighten as if a door had opened in front of me. "What do you think?" Elijah asked, his eyes steady. I inhaled deeply, feeling heat rise in my chest, as though the ashes of my old life were being scattered by a sudden wind. I had carried my family on my back for years, to the point I forgot I could stand alone. I set the paper on the table, met my own tired reflection in the window, and said, "I've carried my family on my back my whole life. Now I will learn to carry myself." The words weren't loud, but they weighed like a vow. Elijah nodded, a faint smile forming on his worn face, as if he had witnessed me being reborn in that single moment. I began preparing for the trip. Elijah helped gather what I needed, booked my flight, and contacted the landowner. He didn't ask why I chose Alaska or whether I was afraid. He let me find my own answers in the quiet. In the small bathroom mirror of the shelter, I studied my face, thin and bruised at the edges from the storm and from the betrayal that came before it. Yet, in my eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen in years, a small flicker of light that belonged to me alone. I held the strap of my bag, feeling as if I was touching the heartbeat of a new beginning. On the day I boarded the plane, the sky cleared. The window reflected the images of passengers settling into their seats. As the plane ascended the city, I left behind shrank beneath a blanket of clouds. I felt as if every second of the flight was stripping away invisible ropes that had held me for too long. I flew north toward a world where the sun rose briefly and snow covered the edges of the earth. I drifted in and out of sleep, and each time I woke, I felt lighter. When the plane landed, the cold bit into my cheeks, but this time it didn't feel threatening. It felt cleansing. Alaska was a different world. The sky stretched endlessly, swallowing every sound. I took a deep breath as I stepped out of the airport, the cold filling my lungs, awakening something long dormant. I rented a car and drove through a valley of white. The land I purchased lay on a high hill, away from the town, surrounded by pine forests and narrow trails. The cabin appeared as dusk settled, the last drop of sunlight catching its wooden walls and making them glow. I placed my hand on the door, feeling as though I had touched a part of a life that had never belonged to me before. The moment I stepped inside, my phone vibrated sharply in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a new email. Short, cold, and alarming. "You must come back immediately. Camille has worked with the police." I froze inside the cabin, the words in the email exploding like a sudden thunderclap over a frozen sky. The short email froze me in place inside the cabin that hadn't even warmed with my presence. The words hung in the air, cold like the wind outside. I set my bag down, pulled out a chair, but couldn't steady my breathing. From Atlanta to Alaska, I had traveled nearly 9,000 miles to escape Camille's cruelty, yet she still found me in the harshest way possible. I opened my phone, checking old messages, unread notifications, trying to piece together fragments of whatever had unfolded. The more I read, the tighter my chest became, as if strings were being pulled hard inside my ribs. When I called back the sender, no one answered. Only an automated tone repeated that the call couldn't connect. I sat for a long moment, staring at the dark screen. The storm outside had just eased, leaving only faint howls against the cabin walls. But inside me, another storm was gathering. I knew Camille would never let me leave her life quietly, but I didn't expect she would drag law enforcement into this. I imagined her face as she reported me missing, probably a rehearsed panic, tears shed at the perfect timing to mask the cold intention underneath. I held my phone, wanting to call Malcolm. My thumb hovered above the screen before I pulled back. I didn't know what frightened me more, hearing nothing from him or hearing him choose Camille over me again. I closed my eyes, then opened them and dialed. The phone rang twice before stopping, as if someone swiped to end the call at the last second. A different coldness climbed my spine, not from Alaska, but from the pain of being denied even the right to hear my son's voice. The cabin door opened quietly then. Elijah stepped inside, snow dusting his coat. He took one look at my face and stopped, reading the heaviness in the room. I handed him the phone with the email still open. He read it, placed the phone on the table, and stayed silent for a moment, as though searching for the least damaging way to deliver the truth. "I'm guessing Camille is fabricating a narrative," Elijah said slowly. "Someone like her always knows how to use the system to corner an opponent." I pressed my lips together, fighting the tremor in my chest. "What did she tell the police?" I asked, though I already sensed the answer. Elijah rested an arm on the chair. "She reported you missing. Said you had memory issues after an argument, signs of losing control, and that you might be a danger to the family." My fingers curled tight into my palms, the pain sharp and direct. My heart felt pulled backward, twisting with disbelief. Camille wasn't trying to smear me. She was trying to erase me legally. Elijah studied me a moment longer, then added, She also mentioned the possibility that you need medical supervision. I let out a dry, bitter laugh. Camille wants to put me in a mental institution, doesn't she, Elijah? Didn't reply. He didn't need to. In my mind, I heard Camille again, her voice sharp enough to cut. If you get sent to a psychiatric hospital, that might be best for everyone. The words echoed like an old wound tearing open. I walked to the cabin window, staring into the endless white outside. I didn't recognize the woman Camille was describing to the police. That wasn't me yet. Camille had always been skilled at turning truth into whatever served her. I turned back, my chest tight. Elijah, what can they do to me? His eyes steadied, but a shadow of concern hid beneath. Camille already filed for a temporary restraining order, keeping you away from the family for their safety. My knees weakened. I couldn't go home, couldn't see Malcolm, and now carried the label of someone dangerous. I sat down, my head spinning. My years of lifting that family flashed through my mind. The nights I stayed up with Malcolm when he was bullied, the nights I nursed Daniel through his illness, all of it now twisted into an accusation meant to isolate me completely. I pressed my hand on the table, trying to gather my breath. Elijah stood by the door, watching me with the quiet readiness of someone prepared to catch me if I fell. After a long silence, he walked over and spoke softly. "Serafina, I think someone is fighting for you in silence." I lifted my head, my heartbeat loud in my ears, searching Elijah's eyes for the truth he had not yet said. But he remained silent, as if the answer was already inside me, waiting for me to reach it. After the email about Camille reporting me missing and filing a protective order, the first days I lived in Alaska felt like standing between two cliffs. One held the remnants of my old life pulling at me. The other was the silent, icy vastness of this new land. But each morning I forced myself to rise, open the cabin door, and look at the snow-covered forest. That sight alone gave me a reason to breathe deeper. I knew that if I didn't stand up now, Camille's actions would bury me alive. No one was coming to rescue me again. This time, I had to pull myself out of the pit they dug beneath my feet. I started fixing the cabin. The wooden walls were peeling, the windows creaked, the fireplace carried the smell of old smoke. I used what little savings I had to buy basic materials, and I repaired each corner myself. I scrubbed away the dust, changed the curtains, added warm yellow lamps to soften the endless nights. The space slowly warmed, reflecting the pieces of myself I was sewing back together. When it finally looked inviting, I took a few photos and posted them in a local travel group offering the cabin for rent. The responses came quicker than I imagined. Travelers looking for peace contacted me asking for rates. A young couple stayed for 2 nights, paid in full, and left a handwritten note saying the cabin made them feel calm. I held that note and cried. Not because of the compliment, but because it had been years since anyone spoke kindness meant for me. I kept cleaning, adjusting, adding small touches. Those little efforts made visitors remember the place. They recommended it to friends. My quiet life slowly grew roots again. The first money I earned after 35 years of serving others felt lighter than air. No one told me I was wrong. No one called me a burden. I held those bills and realized how long I had forgotten my own worth. Here, I wasn't Malcolm's mother or Daniel's wife, and I wasn't the despised daughter-in-law. I was Serafina, a woman who worked, earned, and stood on her own. At night, I would count the bookings for the coming month and feel as though I was watching a road gently leading toward a brighter place. Elijah visited more often. He brought repair materials, business notebooks, and years of local experience. He taught me how to expand services, how to arrange the cabin to make guests feel genuinely welcomed, how to build reliability through the smallest gestures. His patient eyes made me believe I could become someone new, no longer the trembling shadow who ran from the Grant house. Elijah didn't step into my life with pity, but with steady accompaniment that reminded me I wasn't alone. Slowly, I had enough bookings to consider expanding. Elijah helped me find 2 abandoned cabins nearby. They were old, cold, and neglected, but full of potential. I poured all my remaining savings into buying one. In the following days, I learned how to swing a hammer, how to repaint a wall, how to rebuild a broken roof. For the first time in years, I felt strong. My body ached, my hands grew raw, but my spirit wasn't empty anymore. I was building something that belonged to me, something I had never truly owned. Months later, the small homestay area took shape. 3 simple cabins, warm with yellow lights each evening, scented faintly of cinnamon, each morning tended by my hands. Guests came, shared stories, then left carrying a sense of peace they found here. And I, day by day, stepped closer to the freedom I had always longed for. Alaska wasn't the place I ran to. It became the ground where I was reborn. One afternoon, while checking documents for buying the second cabin, my eyes froze on a detail that made my chest tighten. The property title from Atlanta, the house I walked away from, was tucked between the papers Elijah brought for comparison. I opened the first page, reading the ownership line. Malcolm's name stood there. Beneath it was another signature I did not want to believe was real. Camille. They had changed the deed from sole ownership under Malcolm to joint ownership. I set the documents on the table, my hands trembling so much I had to grip the chair, wondering when Camille did this and what storm was waiting for me next. In the days after discovering that the property deed of my old home had been altered into joint ownership between Malcolm and Camille, I barely slept. Each time I stared at Camille's signature beside my son's name, a raw bitterness rose in my throat. From a daughter-in-law who despised me enough to want me erased from her life, Camille had moved into calculated territory. Her cruelty was no longer personal, it was strategic. And what hurt me most wasn't her signature, but Malcolm's silent compliance. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't let Camille weaponize the law against me. If she wanted to fight on paper, I would fight in court. I went to a law office in the nearest town, carrying documents, camera footage, and the threatening emails Camille had sent. The attorney examined everything carefully, his expression tightening as he flipped through the pages. "You have grounds," he said, "for countersuing defamation, filing a false missing person report, extortion, and emotional harm." Hearing those words felt like a heavy fog lifting inside my chest. Camille was no longer a nightmare I suffered in silence. She had stepped into the light of the legal system, and for the first time, I had a voice in the matter. My hand trembled as I signed the counterclaim. The moment the pen touched paper, I felt as if I were rewriting my own life. No one could shush me anymore, or shove me into a corner, or decide I had no value. I sent the documents to the Georgia court. My lawyer arranged a pre-hearing meeting that Malcolm was legally required to attend. That was when my heart beat with equal parts fear and resolve. I was about to face the child I had once shielded from every storm, the same child who had allowed his wife to paint me as unstable. On the day of the meeting, I arrived early and sat in the law office's waiting room. My hands rested on my knees, feeling the faint chill from the window, even though the room was warm. When the door opened, Malcolm walked in, looking thinner, hollowed out. His eyes were red, his shoulders stooped, every step weighted by something he had carried too long. He didn't look at me right away, as though he had to gather the courage to move closer. When he finally sat across from me, He no longer looked like a grown man. He looked like the little boy who once clung to my skirt on his first day of school. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked almost instantly. "I'm sorry, Mom," he sobbed, his hand shaking as he covered his mouth. "I was scared Camille would destroy my career." Every word landed between us like something too heavy to lift. I watched my son, the boy I raised with my own hands, and felt my heart stretch painfully at every apology. He spoke as if that fear excused his silence, his compliance, his surrender to Camille's dominance. I clasped my hands together, steadying my voice. "What about me, Malcolm?" I asked quietly. "Who protected me for 35 years?" The question sliced through the room, sharp and deep. Malcolm's head dropped, tears spilling onto the table. He tried to speak, but the words tangled in his throat. I watched him struggle, seeing clearly the war inside him between the mother who raised him and the woman who controlled him. "Mom," he whispered, finally, his voice trembling like a string stretched too tight. "I never wanted you gone." I wanted to believe him, but memory crawled up like thorns every moment he let Camille tear me down without a word. I searched his eyes for something truer than his apology. Malcolm inhaled shakily, then leaned closer and confessed in a broken whisper, as if releasing the heaviest secret he had ever carried. "Mom, I was the one who activated the SOS on your phone that night." I froze, heartbeat thudding as his confession echoed through the silent room, wondering what lay behind those words, and why he said them with the voice of a man standing on the edge of a ledge. Malcolm's confession made every sound around me disappear. I looked at my grown son trembling before me, and in that moment I saw again the little boy who used to hide behind my back whenever other children bullied him. Malcolm swallowed hard and then spoke, his voice dragging as if pulled out of his chest. The night I left the house, he felt something was wrong, more than all the times Camille had gone too far. When he heard the door close, he ran to the window and saw me walking away under the cold wind. He wanted to run after me, but Camille stood right behind him, throwing him a look that made him freeze as if pressed against a wall. Malcolm went to the kitchen, grabbed my phone that I had left on the table, turned on the emergency locator and sent it, but Camille caught him. She snatched the phone from his hand, turned the signal off, and threatened to use a video she had secretly recorded earlier to destroy his career. It was a video showing Malcolm during an important meeting looking as if he was losing control under pressure. Camille planned to use that clip to fabricate a story that Malcolm was emotionally unstable, unfit to hold his position. A small detail, but enough to ruin the career Malcolm had spent his youth building. After that, I didn't dare speak up. Malcolm lowered his head, his voice choking. "But I never wanted you to disappear." His words fell to the floor like pieces of broken glass, each one cutting through the silence between us. I looked at my son, the one I had given my whole youth to protect, and felt my heart crack along a line I had never noticed before. What hurt most wasn't Camille's threats, but realizing how long my son had been trapped under her shadow. On the day of the hearing, the sky was gray like a cloth pulled over the whole city. I walked into the courtroom with my heartbeat tightening as I spotted Camille sitting at the front, her lips curling into a blade-thin smile. Malcolm sat behind me, his hands clasped, his eyes red from sleepless nights. When the judge asked each side to present their claims, Camille rose immediately with the expression of a performer who had rehearsed for weeks. She said I was unstable, said I had walked away on my own, and then attacked the truth with fabricated accusations that made my stomach twist. Her voice was smooth, calculated, her tone perfectly trained for deception. But then my attorney submitted the counterclaim to the court, clearly stating that Camille had filed a false missing person report, fabricated details, extorted and invented lies about my mental state. Camille inhaled sharply, ready to respond, when Malcolm suddenly stood up. His voice rang out louder than Camille's for the first time, tearing through the mask she had constructed. "Camille, enough," he shouted, his voice trembling but sharp. "You wanted my mother dead so you could take that house." The courtroom fell silent, every eye fixed on Camille. She stared at Malcolm, her face fracturing like cracked porcelain. Then she burst into laughter, a shrill, off-key sound that startled even her own attorney. "Yes," Camille said, each word dropping like a stone. "Because she deserved to be thrown away like trash." Her pretense vanished. The real Camille stood there, the one who had pushed me toward the blizzard and nearly left me to die. The judge's face hardened instantly. My attorney stood up and demanded the evidence be shown. He stated clearly that a security camera outside the Grant house had captured everything that happened the night I was insulted and shoved. Camille's eyes darted around, the panic spreading across her face like cracks in ice. Malcolm tightened his grip on my hand, as if wanting to repair years of silence with that single gesture. "I request the footage from the front door camera be played," my attorney said, his voice steady as steel, "where everything began and where the entire truth was recorded." The screen in front of the judge lit up, preparing to show the video Camille believed she had erased, while I held my breath, unsure whether the next moment would save me or destroy her completely. The courtroom fell into a heavy silence as the large screen lit up. The light washed over Camille's face, revealing every tense line she tried to control. I held my breath, my heart pounding as if it wanted to break out of my chest. The video began to play. The clatter of dishes, the sound of breathing. Then Camille's voice cut through, sharp like glass shattering across the floor. Every word in that recording felt like a wound slicing through the room. Everyone heard clearly how she insulted me, shoved me, then turned around and claimed I was losing my memory as if she owned the right to decide my fate. When the footage showed Camille leaning toward Daniel and saying it'd be better for everyone if she disappeared for good, a cold ripple went through every person present. There was nowhere for her to hide, no sentence left to rewrite. The truth stood there, bare and undeniable. I felt the eyes of the room turning toward me, carrying pity and disbelief at what I had endured. But I didn't look at them. I looked at Camille. Her eyes widened, lips trembling, not from remorse, but from the realization that she no longer had control. Her lawyer lowered his gaze, clearly unwilling to defend a client who had just exposed her own cruelty in front of the entire court. The judge's face hardened, the gavel in his hand seeming heavier before he spoke. That was the moment I knew my life was about to turn the page. The verdict came quickly, but hit with weight like a stone sinking to the bottom of a well. Camille was sentenced to 18 months of probation in order to complete 300 hours of community service at a local nursing home. It felt like fate forcing her to face the elderly souls she once treated like disposable burdens. The court made her pay me $120,000 USD in compensation for emotional damage, financial harm, and the consequences of her false missing person report. Her eyes went wide at the number, but screaming couldn't change anything now. And that was only the beginning. Her workplace sent a representative to announce right there in the courtroom that she was fired for unethical behavior that severely damaged the company's image. It was another blow to a career she had built on a flawless facade, now shattered beyond repair. Then, the judge read the family court's decision. Camille would lose all custody rights. granting full custody to Malcolm with a long-term restraining order preventing her from contacting the child. Her hand clenched hard on the chair, knuckles turning white. But the final blow was one Camille never saw coming. The court approved my lawyer's request to officially remove her from every inheritance linked to the Grant family. Malcolm bowed his head, his expression torn, yet strangely relieved, as if he had finally escaped the cage he hadn't been strong enough to break alone. The judge granted Malcolm an immediate divorce without requiring any additional hearings. Camille burst into tears, not a trace of regret in her sobs, only rage. "You've ruined my life," she screamed, her voice shaking the room. I stood up. All eyes turned to me. I looked at Camille for a long moment before I spoke, my voice steady, not hateful, just true. "No, Camille, you ruined it yourself the day you chose to treat me like I was invisible." The sentence fell like the final stone of her judgment, one no judge needed to pronounce. Camille collapsed into her seat, her eyes emptied, and I knew she finally understood the game was over. When the courtroom closed, Malcolm came to me with tear-filled eyes. He held me tightly, like a child, afraid of losing the most important thing in his life. His voice cracked. "Mom, thank you for staying alive long enough for me to make this right." I placed my hands on his back, warmth rising in my chest, something I thought I would never feel again. Elijah stood behind him, his eyes soft with relief, like a man who had witnessed every step of my journey, from that brutal winter night to the day the truth found its voice. I returned to Alaska after the trial, back to the small lodge I built with trembling hands. Guests filled every room until the end of the year. The sound of footsteps on the snowy path, the laughter, the gratitude, it all filled the hollow space Camille once tried to carve inside me. That night, I stood outside, looking up at the sky where the aurora unfurled like living silk. The green and violet ribbons twisted together like the spine of my own story, broken, once bent, but now glowing in its own way. I breathed deeply, letting the cold enter my lungs, then stepped onto the cabin's wooden porch. The lights above shifted softly, illuminating my face in a moment of clarity. My life had never ended in Atlanta. It had waited to bloom in a place stronger, colder, wilder. I smiled and whispered my final line to myself: "No one is a burden." Some places simply never deserved our light. The wind rose, carrying the sound of approaching footsteps. I turned as Elijah called my name for the first time with a slight tremor in his voice, signaling a new chapter knocking gently at my back.